My son emptied my bank account while I was in the hospital. I spoke the words softly, just to myself, letting them hang in the sterile air of the room. They felt foreign, like a line from a play I had never rehearsed. The only reply was the steady, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor beside my bed. Beep, beep, beep. A mechanical reminder that I was still here, even if the life I thought I knew had just been pulled out from under me. He didn't know, I whispered again, a faint, cold smile touching my lips. That was my test account. But that realization, that small, sharp comfort, came later. In that first moment, there was only the cold. I had been in that room for 3 days. A bad fall, the doctors called it. At 72, a bad fall is a phrase spoken in hushed tones, full of unspoken fears. My son, Leo, had been the image of concern. He had rushed to the hospital, his expensive suit slightly rumpled, his face a mask of filial duty. "Don't you worry about a thing, Mom," he'd said, patting my hand, his grip firm, his eyes already calculated. "I'll handle everything, the bills, the house, you just rest." I had rested, and in that rest, I had asked him to fetch my old tablet from my bedside drawer at home. "I just want to look at some old photos," I'd told him. He brought it the next day, a little too quickly, a little too eager to please. "Here you go, Mom, fully charged." And so, on that third day, with the watery morning light struggling through the blinds, I had logged into my banking application. It was a habit, a small ritual of checking my modest savings. The account I had used for decades, the one my late husband Arthur and I had opened together. It was where my pension went. It was my safety. The balance read $14.22. I blinked. The numbers didn't change. $14.22. The beep of the monitor seemed to grow louder, faster. I could feel the familiar sting of adrenaline, the cold rush in my veins. This was a mistake. It had to be. A bank error, a technical glitch. I tapped the refresh button, my fingers trembling slightly on the cool glass. $14.22. I navigated to the transaction history, and there it was. Not a glitch, not a stranger. A single large transfer. Internal transfer to L.J. Matthews. Leo. My Leo. He hadn't even tried to hide it. He had used the access I gave him years ago, the in case of emergency access, to drain every penny. The date? The day after my fall. The day he had looked so concerned, patting my hand. I closed the tablet and set it on the rolling table over my bed. I looked at the plastic cup of water, the untouched bowl of gelatin, the white, scratchy blanket pulled up to my chest. I thought of Leo as a little boy, his chubby hand clutching mine as we crossed the street. He had a cowlick that would never stay down, and a laugh that could fill the entire house. He was the boy who cried for an entire afternoon when he accidentally stepped on a snail. Where did that boy go? In his place was a man in his late 40s with a car I couldn't pronounce the name of, a house that looked like it belonged in a magazine, and a wife who valued the house more than the home. They were always busy, always closing a deal or networking. Their visits had become brief, transactional. "Just checking in, Mom. Need anything? No? Great. Talk soon." I felt the familiar sting of tears, but I held them back. This was not the time for grief. Grief was a luxury. This was a time for clarity. He must have thought the fall was it, the big one. He must have seen me, frail and connected to wires, and seen not his mother, but a problem to be managed, an estate to be expedited. He had taken the money, my pension, my savings, the money I used for groceries and prescriptions, and he had left me with $14. A nurse came in, her shoes squeaking on the linoleum. "Good morning, Clara. How are we feeling today? Ready to try a little walk?" I looked at her bright, kind face, so full of genuine care for a stranger. "I'm feeling clearer. Thank you, Brenda," I said, and my voice was surprisingly steady. She smiled, helped me sit up, and the world swam for a moment. But as my feet touched the cold floor, the dizziness passed, and something else took its place. A cold, hard resolve. I thought of the way Leo had looked at me, not with love, but with impatience. The way his eyes had darted around my small, tidy home on his last visit, as if he were already mentally appraising the furniture. He had made his move. He had shown his hand. He believed I was a frail, foolish old woman, lying in a hospital bed with one foot in the grave, unaware and helpless. He had left me, as he thought, with nothing. He had forgotten who I was. He had forgotten the lessons my own father, a man who trusted no one, had beaten into me. And he had certainly forgotten about the other accounts, the real ones. The nurse held my arm. "Steady now, Clara, one step at a time." "One step at a time," I repeated. I took a shuffling step, then another. Yes, that's exactly how it's done. Leo had started a game, believing he was the only player. He had no idea that I had been sitting at the chessboard waiting for him to make this exact move for years. The $14.22 was not a tragedy. It was a signal. It was the starting pistol. And as I took another step, leaning on Nurse Brenda, I did not feel like a victim. I felt like a general. The betrayal was a bitter pill, yes, but it was one I had long expected to swallow. And now it was my turn to move. You see, what Leo didn't know, what he could never have known, was that the account he had so meticulously emptied was nothing. It was a decoy. It was the bread I left on the counter for the mouse, while the banquet was safely locked away in the pantry. My dear Arthur, my late husband, was not a flashy man. He was a quiet man, a reader of books and a planter of trees. He wore the same tweed jacket for 20 years until I finally mended the elbows for the third time and declared it a house jacket. Leo, in his sharp Italian suits and gleaming watches, saw his father as a simple, plodding man, a man who had worked a modest job, saved a modest pension, and left his widow, me, in a modest but respectable state. Leo was so very wrong. Arthur was quiet, but he was brilliant. He didn't just read books, he read the market. He didn't just plant trees, he invested in the companies that would one day harvest them, and the companies that would build the houses from them, and the companies that would finance those houses. He saw the world not just as it was, but as it was going to be in 30 or 40 years. And he had started investing, quietly and methodically, in the 1960s, when stocks were things you bought and kept, not things you tweeted about. When he passed, he left me two things. The first was our little house, our shared life, and the test account that Leo knew about, the one with the pension and the grocery money. This was the life we showed the world. It was comfortable, it was real, but it was, by all accounts, modest. The second thing he left me was a key, a small, simple key to a safe deposit box at a bank Leo had never heard of, in a town Leo had never visited. And inside that box was a ledger, just one, leather-bound, and filled with Arthur's neat, precise handwriting. It detailed a portfolio of stocks, bonds, and properties that was, well, considerable would be an understatement. It was the kind of wealth that doesn't shout, it whispers. And it had been whispering and growing and compounding for decades. Arthur had known our son. He had loved him dearly, but he had known him. Leo has a hole in his pocket, Clara, he used to tell me, his eyes sad as he watched our son, then in his 20s, lease a car he couldn't afford. He doesn't understand the difference between value and price. He only understands show. He wants to look rich before he's even learned how to be solvent. And so, Arthur had structured his will to protect me, to protect the legacy from the lifestyle. The vast majority of his wealth was placed in a series of trusts, all in my name, to be managed by me and to be passed on. Well, that was left entirely at my discretion. But the test wasn't just Arthur's. After he passed, it became mine. I could have told Leo. When he lost his first big business venture, some flashy tech startup that was all sizzle and no stake, I could have bailed him out with a check he never would have questioned. When his wife, Amelia, complained bitterly about their starter home, I could have bought them the glass and steel monstrosity they eventually mortgaged themselves to the hilt to acquire. But I didn't, because Arthur was right. To give Leo that money would be like giving a child a lit match in a hay barn. He would destroy himself with it. I thought perhaps that responsibility would teach him, that fatherhood would teach him, that life with its hard knocks would finally teach him. I was wrong. With every passing year, the hole in his pocket grew larger. He and Amelia were drowning in a sea of their own desires. They weren't just keeping up with the Joneses, they were trying to be the Joneses and the Smiths and the Rockefellers all at once. And I, his simple old mother in her sensible shoes, became not a source of love, but a potential resource, an untapped asset. I saw the way he looked at my little house, the one he grew up in. He didn't see the scratches on the door frame where we'd measured his height every year. He saw the land value. He didn't see the antique furniture Arthur and I had saved for, piece by piece. He saw brown furniture that he'd have to pay someone to haul away. So I began my own test. The account he drained, I kept it. Modest, enough for a comfortable life, but not enough to be a true target. Or so I thought. I let him have access for emergencies. I wanted to see, I needed to see, what he would do. I needed to know if Arthur's fears were justified. I held on to a sliver of hope that they weren't. I lay there in that stiff, sterile hospital bed, and I finally had my answer. The fall, the emergency, wasn't a tragedy for him. It was an opportunity. He didn't wait to see if I would recover. He didn't wait for the doctors to give a prognosis. He struck. He took the money he thought was my everything and left me with $14.22 to cover my own funeral. He had no idea that my own father had also left me something. My father, a stern man who believed in land, had left me a portfolio of farmland in the old country, land that was, for decades, just dirt. Until, 5 years ago, a technology company decided it was the perfect sprawling location to build their new European headquarters. Leo was so busy curating his own reflection that he had never once in his entire adult life asked about my family, my inheritance. He just assumed I was Mom, simple, pension-drawing Mom. I picked up the small, plastic phone receiver by the bed. I had to dial the number manually. My fingers, though slightly stiff with arthritis, were steady. It was a number I knew by heart. Matheson, Locke, and Finch. How may I direct your call? A crisp, professional voice answered. Mr. Finch, please, I said. This is Clara Matthews calling. There was a pause, a click, and then a warm, familiar voice came on the line. Clara, my goodness, I heard about your fall. Are you quite all right? Alistair Finch was Arthur's executor and my oldest friend. He knew about the test. He had helped me design it. I'm mending, Alistair. I'm mending, I said. But I find myself in need of your services. It seems my son has made a significant withdrawal. Alistair let out a long, heavy sigh. He didn't need to ask for details. Oh, Clara, he did it then. The test account. He did, I said. The beep of the heart monitor felt like a metronome, counting down. And now, Alistair, it's time to begin. What would you like me to do? He asked. I looked out the window. The city was waking up, a dull roar of traffic starting in the distance. Leo would be at his desk by now, probably on a call, feeling clever, feeling rich. He would be moving my money into one of his failing ventures, feeling like a titan of industry, a master of the universe. He had no idea he was just a little boy playing in a sandbox, and that the tide was about to come in. Alistair, I said, I want you to freeze everything. The main portfolios, the trusts, the offshore accounts. Put a hard lock on every last penny. But I want you to leave the farmland account open, and I want you to move a small amount, say $50,000, into a new checking account in my name, one that only I can access. And what about Leo? Alistair asked, his voice tight with a lawyer's precision. Oh, Leo, I said, and I felt that cold smile return. Leo is about to learn the difference between value and price. We are going to do nothing. We are going to wait. Wait for what, Clara? For him to realize, I said, settling back against the pillows, that the small account he emptied wasn't my safety net. It was his. I was discharged 2 days later. The fall had been a shock, a jolt to these old bones, but my recovery was swift. Alistair had already ensured the hospital bill was paid in full, a quiet transaction from the new account he had opened for me. Leo, of course, was never told. He assumed the hospital was hounding him for payment, a new burden he would have to manage. He arrived to pick me up, not in his gleaming German sedan, but in Amelia's smaller, practical SUV, a subtle downgrade. It seemed my stolen savings were already being funneled into a financial black hole. He was all fussy concern on the surface, but his eyes were hard. Now, Mum, don't you worry about a thing, he said, taking my arm a little too tightly. We'll get you settled. I played my part. I leaned on him more heavily than I needed to. I let my hand tremble as I reached for the car door. Oh, Leo, I sighed, and I didn't have to fake the weariness in my voice. I'm just so tired and so worried. Worried? About what? He asked, his focus already on the traffic, his fingers drumming impatiently on the steering wheel. He had a meeting. I could smell the sharp, expensive cologne he wore, a scent that always seemed to be trying too hard to announce itself. The bills, dear, I whispered, as if afraid to say it aloud. And Leo, I must have been confused. I looked at my bank account on the tablet. It seemed to be empty. This was the moment, the first test. Would he confess? Would he apologize? Would he perhaps show a sliver of the boy who cried over the snail? He didn't even flinch. He let out a practiced, heavy sigh, the kind of sound a man makes when he is burdened by the foolishness of others. Mom, we talked about this. You gave me access for emergencies. Well, this is an emergency, a big one. But all of it, Leo, even the grocery money, I had almost $9,000 in there. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. It's called asset management, Mum. The hospital, the rehab you're going to need, this stuff is expensive. I had to move the money to a high-yield account to make it work for you. It's complicated. Finance, you wouldn't understand. A high-yield account. The lie was so bald, so insulting in its simplicity, that I almost almost laughed. He truly believed I was an idiot. He truly believed I was a relic from an age when women weren't taught to balance a checkbook. "Oh," I said, shrinking back into the passenger seat, playing the part he had written for me. I see. Of course, dear. You are so clever with these things. Thank you for handling it." I saw his shoulders drop, the tension leaving him. He had passed his test. He had successfully managed the difficult old woman. A magnanimous, patronizing smile played on his lips. "Of course, Mom. I'm handling everything. Now, about your house." "My house?" I asked, as he pulled up to the curb of my small, perfect home. The roses Arthur and I had planted were in full bloom, a riot of pinks and reds. "It's just not safe for you anymore," he said, his tone final. "You fell. You could fall again. And frankly, the upkeep, you can't manage it. Amelia and I have been discussing it, and we've made a decision." Amelia. She was waiting by the front door, her arms crossed, her foot tapping. Her face was a mask of strained sympathy, an expression that didn't quite reach her cold, appraising eyes. She was dressed for a luncheon, not for welcoming an invalid. "Clara, darling," she cooed, air kissing the space an inch from my cheek as Leo helped me from the car. "You gave us such a fright. We've decided you are not spending another night here alone." "We're moving you into the in-law suite," Leo announced, as if he were granting me a kingdom. The in-law suite. I knew that room. It was a small, windowless space in their cavernous basement, next to the boiler room and the wine cellar. It had been designed for a live-in housekeeper they could never afford. "But my things," I stammered, the performance becoming easier, the panic feeling almost real. "My furniture, Arthur's desk, my books." "Oh, Clara, you won't need all that clutter," Amelia said, wrinkling her nose as she finally stepped inside my home. "It's all so brown, and it smells a bit like, well, old books. We'll hire one of those services. They'll just clear it out. Sell what they can. Don't you worry your head about it." Clear it out. My life, my memories, my Arthur. They were clearing it out like a patch of weeds. And so I became the victim. I was installed in their cold, sterile, glass and steel house. My suffering, on the surface, was quite genuine. The basement room was cold. The sound of the boiler was a constant, dull moan that vibrated through the pillow. They gave me their old, cast-off television, the one with the broken remote, and a small cot. My days were spent observing. I was the ghost at their feast. Amelia treated me like an inconvenient piece of furniture. "Clara, could you not use the good towels? We have guests." Or, "Clara, the kitchen is for family meals. I've left a tray for you on the landing." Leo was worse. He was filled with a terrible, swaggering arrogance. He had handled his mother problem. He had secured his inheritance. He had, in his mind, taken over my finances for my own good. He would stride past my open door, barking into his phone about portfolio expansions and leveraging assets. He was using my stolen $9,000 as the cornerstone of his imaginary empire. But while I was the poor, deaf old woman in the basement, I was not idle. I listened. Their house, I learned very quickly, was a house of cards. The walls were thin. I heard the hushed, frantic arguments late at night. Leo's big deal, the one he'd been boasting about for months, was failing. The leveraged assets were not leveraging. The portfolio was bleeding. He had needed my money not for my hospital bills, but as a desperate last-ditch infusion for his own failing business. I heard him on the phone with creditors, his voice no longer booming, but high and thin. "Yes, I know I'm late. An unexpected family matter. A new line of credit has just opened up. You'll have it by the 1st." A new line of credit. He meant my house. He was planning to sell it. He was planning to sell my home, Arthur's home, to pay his debts. Meanwhile, I played my part. I was frail, I was forgetful, I was confused, and I accidentally left my new, simple cell phone charging in the kitchen overnight, the one Alistair had provided me, the one with a very sensitive, very effective audio recording app. I gathered the evidence, the phone calls, the shouting, the casual cruelty. Amelia complaining that the estate sale for my junk had barely covered the cost of the movers. Leo boasting to a friend that he'd finally taken control and that the old girl doesn't even know what day it is. It's a blessing, really. While they saw a victim, I was a general, gathering my intelligence. Alistair had, in the meantime, been busy. Using the $50,000 I'd had him move, he had secured a lovely, small, one-bedroom apartment in a secure building across town. He had moved Arthur's desk, my favorite reading chair, my books, and all my photographs, the real valuables, out of my house under the guise of an antiques appraiser. Leo had been too arrogant and too busy to supervise. My new home was waiting for me. I just needed to wait for the right moment. I needed Leo to believe, fully and completely, that he had won. His arrogance was my greatest weapon. It was the rope he was feeding himself, faster and faster, and I was just quietly waiting for him to reach the end of it. He thought he had taken my life. He had no idea he was giving me the very justification I needed to take back his. Karma, you see, is not a lightning bolt from a clear sky. It is not a sudden, dramatic strike of vengeance. It is a slow, methodical creditor. It is the steady, quiet accumulation of your own bad debts. Leo and Amelia had been borrowing against their own character for decades. I was simply there to watch the bill finally come due. The $9,000 he had stolen from me was gone in a day. I knew this because the shouting, which had been muffled and frantic before, became shrill and desperate. I sat on my cot in the basement, the dull throb of the boiler my only company, and I listened. That money, it turned out, was a good faith payment to a private lender for his failing business. But it wasn't enough. It was like using a teacup to bail out a sinking ship. The first real domino to fall was not the business. It was the show. It was Amelia. I had been given a small list of chores, just to keep you active, Clara. Polishing the silver they never used, folding the laundry. I was in the cavernous, white marble kitchen, wiping down a countertop that was already spotless, when Amelia stormed in. Her face, usually a mask of powdered composure, was blotchy and red, her eyes wide with a kind of primal terror I had never seen in her. She wasn't speaking to me, of course. She was shrieking into her phone. "What do you mean declined? Try it again. It's a platinum card. I don't care. I am at Cartier's, and I am telling you to run the card." There was a pause. I kept wiping, my strokes slow and even. Wipe, wipe. "What? What do you mean?" Her voice dropped to a reedy whisper. "Suspicious. Activity? Our accounts? That's impossible." She slammed the phone down and her hands were shaking. She saw me, her eyes narrowing. "What are you staring at, old woman? Go dust the foyer. Get out." I shuffled away, my heart calm and steady. It had begun. The bank, seeing Leo's frantic, last-minute payment to an unsecured creditor, had finally pulled the plug. The show was over. The next day, it was the car. Not Leo's sedan. He was hiding that at his office. but Amelia's SUV, the one he had used to collect me from the hospital. A tow truck, surprisingly quiet, backed into their curved driveway. I watched from the small, high basement window. They didn't even knock. They simply hooked it, and in less than 5 minutes, it was gone. Amelia's wail from the front lawn was a sound I will not soon forget. Now, Leo was a cornered animal. The house of cards was collapsing in real time, and he had only one card left to play. My house, my little, paid-for, rose-covered bungalow. He came to me that evening. He didn't bother with the pretense of bringing me a tray of food. He stormed into my small room, the fluorescent light casting hard, cruel shadows on his face. He was holding a sheaf of papers and a pen. "Mum," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "I need you to sign these." I looked up from the book I was reading, an old paperback copy of David Copperfield that Alistair had slipped into my bag. "Sign what, dear? My, you look flushed. Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine," he snapped. "It's just more paperwork for your asset management. I'm moving the house into the trust I set up for you. It's for tax purposes. It's to protect you." He shoved the papers onto my lap. I fumbled for my reading glasses, the ones with the cheap plastic frames I'd bought at the drugstore. I squinted at the document. My goodness, Leo, this looks like a sales agreement. "It's not," he lied, his voice rising. "It's just, the bank needs evaluation. It's complicated. Just sign here." He pointed to the line. I let my hand tremble. "Oh dear, I don't know. Arthur always told me." "Clara," he said, "never sign anything you haven't read. And never, ever sell the house. It's your heart, Clara, your heart." "For God's sake, Mum, stop talking about Dad. He's gone," Leo roared, and the mask of the caring son didn't just slip. He ripped it off and threw it to the ground. "He was a fool, and you're being a fool. That house is a rotting pile of bricks, and it's the only asset we have left. Now sign the paper." I recoiled, pulling the thin blanket up to my chin. I let the tears well in my eyes, and they weren't entirely fake. To see him like this, to see the boy who loved snails become this monster, it was a grief deeper than any hospital stay. I can't," I whispered. My hand is shaking too much. I can't hold the pen. I think I need to rest. I'm very tired, Leo." He raised his hand, and for one terrible, frozen moment, I thought he might strike me. His face was purple with rage, his fist clenched. He was a man drowning, and I was the piece of driftwood he couldn't grasp. He didn't hit me. He let out a sound, a strangled sob of pure, undiluted fury, and stormed out of the room, slamming the door so hard the frame shuddered. He had failed. He couldn't get my signature, and now he was out of time. The next 2 days were a blur of escalating horror for them. The private lender he had stiffed sent 2 very large, very unfriendly men in dark suits. I heard them in the foyer. Their voices were quiet, but they carried. They were not interested in excuses. They were interested in collateral. They took Leo's watch. They took Amelia's wedding ring right off her finger as she sobbed that it wouldn't even cover the interest. And then the final stroke. The bank. The one that held the mortgage on their glass and steel prison. The foreclosure notice was not a phone call. It was a thick white envelope taped to the massive pivoting front door. Leo came home, found it, and I heard a sound, a slow, sinking wail. It was the sound of a man who had bet everything on red and the ball had landed on black. He hadn't just lost his house, he had lost it because he had stolen from me. His theft had been the final, definitive act of financial irresponsibility that triggered the avalanche. He had no business, he had no credit, he had no cars, and now he had no home. The bank had given them 48 hours to vacate. He thought he was taking my future, but he had only, and with terrible, perfect precision, destroyed his own. I sat in the basement, listening to the hollow, echoing sounds of Amelia packing, her sobs punctuated by curses. I just sat and I waited, because I knew, as surely as I knew my own name, that he would be back. The man who had everything, who had stolen from his own mother, would have to come to the one person he believed had nothing. He had nowhere else to go. They had until 5 o'clock in the evening. At 4:30, the house was an echoing tomb. The massive, pivoting front door stood open, a dark mouth waiting to spit them out. Their designer suitcases, the only things the creditors hadn't taken, were piled in the once grand foyer. Amelia sat on the largest suitcase, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking in dry, racking sobs. It was the sound of a woman mourning, not a life, but a lifestyle. I had packed my own small bag, the one I'd brought from the hospital, and I was sitting on my cot, waiting. The boiler had mercifully clicked off, and the silence from the basement was absolute. I heard his footsteps on the hardwood floor above me, then on the basement stairs. He didn't knock. The door creaked open. It was not the same man who had tried to force a pen into my hand. The rage was gone. The arrogance had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, gaunt-eyed shell. His expensive suit was wrinkled, as if he had slept in it for days. His tie was gone. He looked old, older than me. He just stood there for a long moment, his gaze falling on my small bag. He didn't look at me, not directly. He looked at the concrete floor. You're packed," he stated. His voice was a dry rasp. "Yes, dear," I said, my voice quiet and calm. "They said 5 o'clock. "Where? Where will you go?" he asked. He still wasn't looking at me. He was asking the floor. "Oh, I'll be fine," I said gently. "Don't you worry about me." This seemed to break something in him. He finally looked up, and his eyes were full of a raw, terrified panic I had never seen. Don't say that." "Don't worry. Where will you go? A shelter? The council housing list? It takes months, Mom. Years. I checked." I saw it then, the final, crushing humiliation. He had assumed, in his boundless arrogance, that my fate was tied to his, that in destroying himself, he had also destroyed me. He had come down to the basement not to save me, but to find his co-victim, to see what I was going to do so he could, perhaps, follow. "Leo," I said, standing up and smoothing my simple skirt, "what are your plans? You and Amelia, where will you go?" He flinched, as if I had struck him. I don't know," he whispered. The admission seemed to physically pain him. My friends. No one is answering their phone. The accounts are all, there's nothing. We have about $200 in cash. And his voice broke. Amelia's parents won't even take our call. He had come to me, the poor, deaf old woman in the basement, as his absolute last resort. He, the titan of industry, the asset manager, had come to the woman he believed had $14.22 to her name to ask for salvation. He finally asked, "Mom, can we come with you?" I let the question hang in the air, in that cold, silent room. I let him stand there in the full, unshielded glare of his own failure. He was asking to share my fate, a fate he had tried to assign to me. I sighed, a small, put-upon sound. Oh, Leo, you really haven't planned at all, have you? My goodness. I picked up my bag. Well, I suppose you can't just stay on the street. A flicker of hope lit his desperate eyes. Then, you have somewhere? I do, I said. When I was in the hospital, I realized I couldn't stay in the big house. It was just too much for me. Too much, as you said. I looked him right in the eye. So I had a friend, a nice young man from the church, help me find a new place. He's been moving my important things for me while I've been staying here with you. A new place? Amelia had appeared at the top of the stairs, her makeup streaked, her voice shrill. What new place? Is it clean? It's a one-bedroom apartment, I said, walking past Leo and up the stairs. In a complex for seniors. It's modest, but it is clean. I walked past her, out the front door, and onto the driveway, where a taxi was just pulling up. A Lister's timing was, as always, perfect. Leo and Amelia stared at the taxi, then at each other, then at me. This was it. Rock bottom. Their last chance was to get in a cab with the old woman they had discarded. Wordlessly, they grabbed their suitcases. The taxi driver, a kind man with a weathered face, helped me into the front seat. Leo and Amelia piled into the back, their expensive luggage crammed around their knees, their faces averted from the driver, from me, from the house they had lost. The ride was silent. The only sound was Amelia's muffled, angry sobs. Leo just stared out the window, his reflection a pale ghost against the passing city lights. We drove across town, away from the glittering, soulless neighborhoods of glass houses and into an older, quieter part of the city. The buildings were brick, the trees were mature, and the people looked normal. The taxi pulled up to a clean, respectable, but utterly unremarkable three-story brick building, the Willow Creek Apartments. "Here we are," I said cheerfully. We got out. I paid the driver from the small roll of cash Alistair had given me. Leo's eyes darted to the money, a quick, hungry, calculating look, before he stamped it out. I led them inside, to apartment 2B. I unlocked the door. It was a one-bedroom apartment. It was small. The living room contained my old, comfortable floral print sofa, my reading chair, Arthur's desk, and my television. There was a small, clean kitchenette. A hallway led to a single bedroom, my bedroom, and a bathroom. "Well, here it is," I said, setting my bag down. "Home." Amelia looked around. Her lip curled in a silent snarl of disgust. This is it? Where do we sleep?" I pointed to the sofa. "It's a fold-out, dear. I'm afraid it's all there is. It's you and Leo in the living room, I'm afraid. A bit like an in-law suite, isn't it?" Leo didn't say a word. He just sank onto the sofa, the fight gone, his body heavy with the full weight of his collapse. "Now," I said, putting on the kettle, "there are some rules. This is a subsidized building. The rent is very low, but it is not free. I can cover my share, of course, but you two, you will have to contribute." Leo looked up, his face ashen. "Contribute? With what? I have nothing." "You have your hands," I said gently. "You have your health. I was looking at the board in the lobby on my way in. The grocery store at the corner needs someone to stock shelves, and the coffee shop on the main street is hiring a barista, I believe they call it." I went to the small counter, pulled out a notepad and a pen. I wrote down the phone numbers. "Amelia?" I said. "You're very good at cleaning. Perhaps you could find some work doing that for the neighbors." Amelia's head snapped up, her eyes blazing. I will not." "You will," I said, my voice no longer gentle. It was quiet, but it was steel. "You will. Or you will find your own apartment. You will eat what I cook. You will sleep on that sofa. And tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., Leo, you will go to that grocery store and you will ask for Mr. Henderson. And you will be polite. You, for the first time in your life, earn an honest wage for an honest day's work. Do you understand me?" Leo just stared at me. He was seeing me, really seeing me, for the first time. Not as mom, not as a fool, but as the person who held the only roof over his head. The lesson had begun. The kettle whistled. "Now," I said, turning back to the counter, "who wants a cup of tea?" The first 2 weeks were a special kind of torment, mostly for them. Amelia, it turned out, was not suited for domestic work. She was fired from her first 3 house-cleaning jobs. She complained about the chemicals, about the disgusting state of people's homes, about the humiliation. She spent most of her days on my sofa, painting her nails and weeping. Leo, however, was different. He was a man hollowed out, but the hollow space was, for the first time, open to new instruction. He went to the grocery store. He got the job. Mr. Henderson, a gruff but fair man, set him to work in the pre-dawn hours, stocking shelves and unloading trucks. At first, Leo would come home at noon, his expensive suit, now his work uniform, stained and rumpled. He would collapse onto the sofa and sleep, the deep, dead sleep of a man physically exhausted for the first time in his life. He barely spoke. He ate the simple stews I made without comment, his gaze fixed on the wall. His soft, manicured hands, the hands of an asset manager, became red, then raw, then calloused. I watched him. I said nothing. I just cooked. I tidied our small space. I read my books. I let the relentless, grinding routine of an honest, working life do its slow work on him. Amelia was the first to crack. After 3 weeks of my quiet disappointment and Leo's stony silence, she exploded. "I can't do this, Clara. I am not a servant. And you," she whirled on Leo, who was lacing up his worn-out dress shoes for his 4 a.m. shift. "You are pathetic. Look at you, a stock boy. I didn't marry a laborer." Leo finished tying his shoe. He stood up slowly. He was thinner, but he seemed denser. The puffiness of his old life was gone. He looked at her, his wife, and I saw not anger, but a profound, weary pity. "Go, then, Amelia," he said, his voice a low rasp. "What?" she sputtered. "Go. You have, what, $100 left from selling your earrings? Go to your parents. Go to your friends. Go back to whatever world you think is waiting for you. But I am going to work." He picked up his lunch, a sandwich I had made for him, and walked out the door, not slamming it, just closing it behind him. Amelia stared at the door, her mouth open. She looked at me, expecting me to, what? Comfort her? Join her? I just sipped my tea. Her rage deflated, replaced by a cold, calculating fear. She had nowhere to go. She knew it. The next day, she got a job as a dishwasher at the coffee shop and did not complain. But the real change in Leo came about a month later. I was sitting at Arthur's desk, going over my simple household budget. I was struggling. My eyes, even with my glasses, were finding it hard to focus on the small print of the electric bill. I rubbed my temples, frustrated. Leo, who I thought was asleep on the sofa, was suddenly beside me. He didn't speak. He just gently took the bill and the pen from my hand. What's this one? He asked. The electric, dear. It just seems higher this month. I'm not sure. He sat down, not at the desk, but on the small stool beside it, bringing him lower than me. The rates went up, he said, his voice quiet. Seasonal. And you're adding it wrong, Mom. He turned the paper over. He began to write, his old familiar script so clear and precise. You have to carry the... See? Here. You're not. He stopped. He wasn't scolding me. He was just helping. He figured out the budget in 3 minutes. There, he said, handing it back. You'll be fine. You're $7 under for the month. Oh, I said, genuinely relieved. Oh, thank you, Leo. You are still so clever with numbers. He looked down at his rough, red hands, clasping them between his knees. No, he whispered. No, I'm not. I'm a fool. I've been such a fool. He didn't look up, but I saw a single hot teardrop onto his knee. Mom, about your money, the $9,000, I'm so... I know, Leo, I said softly. I know. That was the moment. That was the turning point. Not the collapse, not the poverty. It was that small, genuine act of service. It was that quiet, choked admission of regret. He wasn't beaten. He was remorseful. He continued to work. He and Amelia were like 2 sullen ghosts in my small apartment, but they were working. They were paying their share, in cash, from their meager weekly wages. Then came the day. It was a Friday, Leo's payday. He came home, not at noon, but in the late afternoon. He was holding his check. He had cashed it. He walked over to me where I sat reading. He didn't just toss the money on the table. He held it out. Mom, he said. His voice was steady. Here it is, my share for the rent and the food. And it's not much, but this is the first $20 of the $9,000. I'll pay it all back, even if it takes me the rest of my life. I looked at the small, crumpled pile of bills in his calloused hand. $20, earned by lifting crates of melons and stocking cans of soup. It was, I knew, the most valuable money he had ever held. He had finally learned the difference between value and price. I put my book down. I took the money from his hand and I closed my own hand over his. Thank you, Leo. This means more than you know. I stood up. It is time, I said. He looked confused. Time? Time for what? My shift? No. Tomorrow morning, you and I have an appointment. 9 a.m. Don't be late. A flicker of his old panic returned. An appointment? With who? Is it the bank? Another creditor? Mom, I told you I'd pay. No, Leo, I said, walking to the window and looking out at the quiet street. It's not a creditor. It's an appointment with my lawyer, Mr. Finch. The next morning, we sat in Alistair Finch's office. It was exactly as I remembered. Old world, quiet, filled with the scent of wood polish and old paper. It was the antithesis of the glass and chrome offices Leo used to frequent. Leo himself sat stiffly in his one good suit, the one he had managed to get cleaned, looking utterly terrified. Alistair entered, all kindness and professionalism. Clara, a pleasure to see you. You're looking well. He turned to Leo. Mr. Matthews, thank you for coming. Mr. Finch, Leo mumbled, his eyes on the floor. I got right to it. Leo, I said, my voice gentle but firm. Do you remember in the hospital when you told me you had moved my money for asset management? Leo flinched. Shame washed over his face. Mom, please. I I know what I did. I'm trying to make it right. I'll I'll work. I'll That's not why we are here, I said, cutting him off. You were right in a way. That account was an asset. It was a test you and I have been failing for a very long time. Alistair, on cue, slid a single, thick, dark green ledger across the polished mahogany desk. It stopped directly in front of Leo. Mr. Matthews, Alistair said, his voice formal. What your mother is too gracious to say is that the account you emptied was, well, we refer to it as the test account. It was a decoy. Your father, Leo, your father was a brilliant man, and he was very, very worried about you. Leo's head snapped up. Dad? What does this have to do with Dad? Everything, I said. Alistair opened the ledger. It was filled with Arthur's neat, precise handwriting. Dates, company names, share numbers, property deeds. This, Alistair said, his finger running down the first page, is the actual asset management portfolio for the Matthews estate, the one your mother has been managing quite expertly since your father's passing, the one he built for her, for you, for your future. Leo stared. His eyes scanned the page, then the next, then the next. I saw his lips move, silently counting the zeros. I saw his hand begin to tremble. This wasn't a small savings account. This wasn't a modest pension. This was land, stocks, bonds, offshore holdings. This was a fortune. It was the kind of wealth he had pretended to have, the kind of wealth he had destroyed himself trying to imitate. He looked up at me, his face a mask of pale, dawning, horrified comprehension. He looked at the book. He looked at me, his poor old mother who lived in a one-bedroom apartment. You, he stammered. All this time, you let me. Yes, I said softly, as he stared, speechless at the pages. I let you. I let you stock shelves. I let you lose your house. I let you sleep on my sofa. I leaned forward. You see, Leo, you were so busy trying to steal the silver, you never realized you were meant to inherit the mine. But only if you were worthy of it. The question is, son, are you worthy of it now? My question, are you worthy of it now, hung in the air, suspended in the quiet, sun-dusted office. The only sound was the faint tick-tock of a grandfather clock in the corner. Leo did not look at the ledger. He did not reach for it. He did not, as I had half feared, show a flicker of hunger or avarice. His eyes, which had been darting over the pages, now lifted and met mine, and in them I saw something I had never seen before. I saw a man looking not at a prize, but into a mirror, and hating the reflection. He saw the scale of his own pettiness. He had not just stolen from his mother. He had done it while sitting on a mountain of his own inheritance, too blind and too arrogant to see it. He had, in his desperate, greedy grasp for a few $1,000s, proven himself unworthy of millions. The dramatic irony was not lost on him. It hit him with the force of a physical blow. His face, which had been pale with shock, slowly crumpled. It was not the theatrical sobbing of Amelia, but a deep, silent, agonizing collapse. His shoulders shook. He put his head in his calloused worker's hands. "No," he whispered, his voice so muffled I could barely hear it. "I'm not." He pushed the open ledger, with all its power and all its zeros, away from him, back towards the center of the desk. It was the first time in his life he had ever pushed money away. "I'm not," he said again, his voice clearer, stronger. He raised his head, and his face was a ruin of self-realization. "My God, Mom, my God." He wasn't talking about the money. He was talking about me. He was looking at me, sitting there in my simple clothes, the woman he had relegated to a cot in his basement, and he was finally understanding. You knew," he whispered, his gaze locked on mine. When I emptied your account, you knew. You let me." "I did," I said softly. "You let me lose the house. You let me work stocking shelves. You let Amelia. You let us." He couldn't finish. The scale of my patience, of my test, was dawning on him, and it was, in its own way, more terrifying than any punishment. "I let you find rock bottom, Leo," I said. "I was hoping, at the very bottom, you might finally find yourself, the boy I used to know." He's been gone a long time," Leo choked out. He looked at Alistair, who had remained a silent, compassionate witness. "And Dad, he knew what I was. He did all this to protect it from me." "He did all this," I corrected him gently, "in the hope of you. He built it for you, Leo. He just needed you to be the man he knew you could be." Leo stood up then, his chair scraping back harshly on the polished floor. He was trembling. I can't. I have to go." He walked, not to the door, but to the window, looking down at the street, his back to us. "I'm a monster," he said to the glass. "I left my mother in a hospital. I tried to. I was angry that she didn't die. I stole her last pennies, and I tried to steal her house." He turned around, and his face was wet with tears, but his voice was hard with self-loathing. "And you had all this. You could have crushed me in a second. You could have saved me. Why did you do this? Why let me fail so completely?" "Because, Leo," I said, rising and walking toward him. "Saving you with money would have been the cruelest thing I could do. It would have taught you nothing. It would have rewarded your greed. I didn't want to save your lifestyle, son. I wanted to save you." Alistair cleared his throat. "Clara," he said, "the trusts are, of course, entirely at your discretion. The paperwork to grant Mr. Matthews access is prepared." "No," Leo said, his voice sharp. He turned from the window. "No, I don't want it." Alistair and I both looked at him. "I don't want it," he repeated. I won't. I can't. I haven't even paid you back for the 9,000. I haven't even earned back anything." He looked at me, his eyes full of a desperate, pleading sincerity. "Mom, please, don't give me anything. I want to keep my job. I want to keep paying you back the $20. He finally understood. He finally understood that the $20 he had earned with his own sweat was worth more than the unearned millions in that book. I smiled, a real warm smile. "That," I said, "is the first sensible financial decision you have made in your entire adult life." The taxi ride back to the small apartment was silent, but it was a different silence. It was not the cold, angry silence of their collapse. It was the heavy, contemplative silence of a world that had been turned upside down. Leo sat beside me, his hands clasped, staring straight ahead, as if processing a lifetime of truths in a single afternoon. When we walked in, Amelia was on the sofa, filing her nails, a talk show blaring on the television. She had changed into a silk blouse, as if expecting to be taken to a celebratory lunch. "Well," she said, not even looking up, "what did the old lawyer want? Are we being sued? Or did you finally convince her to sell her hovel?" Leo looked at her. He looked at the television, at the cheap, painted furniture, at the small, clean room that had been his sanctuary. And I saw him see her, truly see her, for the first time. He saw the face of his own greed, his own shallowness reflected back at him. She was the ghost of the man he had just finally begun to bury. He walked over and picked up the remote. He turned the television off. The sudden silence filled the room. "Amelia," he said, his voice quiet, devoid of anger or pity, "I think it's time for you to go." She finally looked up, her eyes wide. What did you say to me?" "I've arranged a car," he said. "It's downstairs. It will take you to your parents' house. I'll send you money when I've earned it. But us, it's over. It's been over for a long time." You are dumping me?" she shrieked, standing up. "In this rat trap? After I stuck by you through this?" "You didn't stick by me, Amelia," Leo said, his voice unutterably weary. "You and we were just partners in the same failed business, and we've gone bankrupt." She looked at me, her face twisted in rage. You did this. You poisoned him." "No, my dear," I said, picking up the kettle. "He's just finally taking his medicine." She grabbed her purse, threw a few last hateful words at us, and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. And for the first time, the little apartment felt peaceful. Leo stood in the middle of the room for a long time. Then he let out a breath, a shuddering sigh that seemed to carry the last 20 years of his life with it. He turned to me. I'm late for my shift," he said. "Yes, you are," I replied. He walked to the door, grabbed his simple jacket. He paused, his hand on the knob. "Mum, about Dad. I feel like I never knew him at all. I always thought he was weak because he wasn't flashy, because he just loved you and loved his garden." "He was the strongest man I ever knew, Leo," I said. "I know," he said, his voice thick. "I know that now. Could you, when I get home, could you just tell me about him? Not the ledger, just him." "I would like that very much, Leo," I said. He nodded, wiped his eyes, and walked out the door, off to a job where he would lift heavy boxes and sweep floors. He walked out a man who knew he was the heir to a vast fortune, and he went to his menial job anyway. Because it was no longer about the money, it was about making amends. It was about earning back a legacy of character, a legacy he had just realized was the only one that ever truly mattered. He was, at last, on his way to becoming worthy. And so that is what we did. Our little apartment, once a symbol of his failure, became his classroom and my sanctuary. The dynamic between us shifted. He was no longer the arrogant son, and I was no longer the frail victim. We were just two people in a small, quiet home. Every evening, he would come back from the grocery store, his face etched with a physical tiredness, but his eyes clear. He would shower, and then he would make us both a pot of tea. He'd sit, not on the sofa, but on the small stool by my reading chair, and he would say, "Tell me about the farm," or "Tell me about the first house you and Dad bought." I told him everything. I told him about his father, Arthur. I told him about the quiet, stubborn integrity that made it impossible for him to tell even a small, convenient lie. I told him about Arthur's patience, how he had bought his very first shares of stock, not in some flashy, speculative company, but in the company that made the fertilizer for his roses and the company that manufactured the spades he used. He only invested, I told Leo, in things he understood, things that grew. Things that built a better, more solid world, not just a bigger bank account. I told him how Arthur had visited the farmland I had inherited long before it was valuable and had simply sat on the hillside listening to the dirt, as he said. He wasn't a man who saw assets, he was a man who saw value. Leo absorbed these stories like a man dying of thirst. He was not just learning about the father he had dismissed. He was, piece by piece, remaking himself in his father's image. He kept working at the grocery store. He never once complained. He was promoted, not to some high-level management position, but to shift supervisor. It came with a small, honest raise of 50 cents an hour. Mr. Henderson, his boss, stopped me one day as I was buying apples. "That son of yours, Clara," he said, scratching his chin, "he's the best worker I've had in 20 years. He's quiet, he's thorough, and he's humble. Didn't expect it, I'll admit. Not from a man who used to wear such fancy shoes." Every Friday, like a sacred ritual, Leo would come home with his paycheck. He would cash it at the bank, and he would come to me at Arthur's desk. It had, by unspoken agreement, become his desk. He would lay out the cash and divide it with the precision of an accountant. So much for his half of the rent, so much for his half of the food, and a small, steady amount for the debt. It took him 3 years. 3 years of stocking shelves, of 4 a.m. alarms, of living in my small apartment, of a life devoid of all luxury. He never complained. He never once asked about the ledger. He never once spoke of Mr. Finch's office. Then, one Tuesday, he came home. It was the middle of the month, not payday. He sat beside me at the desk. He placed a small, worn stack of bills on the blotter. "Mom," he said, his voice quiet, steady, "that's it. That's the last of it. $9,000. And I calculated the interest based on what that account would have earned. It's all there. I'm paid in full." I looked at the money. I looked at my son. He was 49 years old. The last vestiges of his old, puffed-up life were gone. He was thin, but he was solid. The stress lines around his eyes had been replaced by the quiet confidence of a man who knows precisely what he is worth. I pushed the stack of money back toward him. "Good," I said. "Now what will you do with it?" He looked confused. "Do with it? I'll just keep saving it. I'm fine, Mom. I'm happy." "I think," I said, picking up the phone, "it is time for another visit with Mr. Finch." This time, when we sat in that quiet, wood-paneled office, Leo was not a terrified wreck. He was a calm, steady man in a simple, clean suit. He looked as if he belonged there, far more than he ever had in his days of empty arrogance. Alistair, older now too, smiled warmly as we entered. "Leo," I said, getting right to it, "your father's legacy is waiting. I am an old woman, and I cannot manage it alone anymore. It is not a prize for good behavior. It is a tool. It is a responsibility. And I need a partner, one I can trust." Leo looked at the green ledger, which sat in the middle of the desk. He did not open it. I don't know how to do that," he said, his voice full of an honest humility. "I only know how to tear things down. I know how to stack boxes. You know how to work, I said, placing my hand on his. You know how to be patient. You know how to be honest. You know the value of $20. Your father would have said, you are, at last, the most qualified man in the world. And so we began, not with a transfer of funds, but with an education. Alistair and I taught him. We taught him about the land, about the sustainable funds, about the charitable trusts Arthur had quietly established. Leo's new version of asset management was nothing like his old one. He didn't buy flashy stocks. He didn't leverage. He built. He took a portion of the farmland inheritance, and instead of selling it to the highest bidder, he worked with Alistair to turn it into a trust for agricultural education and land preservation. He used the dividends from the main portfolio to establish a new foundation in his father's name. It provides small, no-interest second-chance loans to people who, like him, have lost everything to debt and bad decisions, giving them a way to rebuild, just as he had. He didn't move into a glass house. He stayed with me in that little apartment for another 2 years, until I was the one who insisted I wanted a garden. We bought a small house, together, a bungalow, not unlike my old one. It has a beautiful yard filled with roses. He never remarried. He dedicated his life to managing that legacy, not as a source of wealth, but as a source of quiet, systemic good. He became, in every way, his father's son. He became the man Arthur had always hoped he would be. I see him sometimes, out in the garden, pruning my roses. His hands are still calloused, but they are the calluses of a gardener now, not just a stock boy. He is quiet. He is content. He is, at last, at peace. And so am I. The test is over. My son is finally home. And that, my dear, is the story of the greedy son who learned his lesson. Did I do the right thing? Let me know what you would have done in the comments below. I have so many more stories to share. Please subscribe and join our family so you don't miss the next one. Until next time, this is Auntie Clara. Be good to one another.